Welcome back. So this is a three-part series where we're going to be looking at the host, the environment, and the pathogen. And we did that one already, haven't we, Henry?
Yep.
Then we're going to take a look at the integrated strategies that we can put in place. That's what we're going to look at today. And then the next one, we're going to take a look at fungicide strategies and how we can piece that together. I'm Glenn Kirby from Syngenta.
And I'm Henry Bechley from ICL. So, Glenn, let's keep moving. Already in the first episode, I've got to admit that I did paint quite a bleak picture about Microdochium patch and, you know, its causal pathogen, Microdochium nivalis. But we know from our experiences and all those kind of multiple trials that we both carry out that we can utilize various methods and technologies, firstly, to slow down the rate of development of the disease, and also use modern fungicides to achieve remarkable levels of control. But to build successful management plans, to link everything together in an integrated way, we firstly need to understand and recognize the conditions that favor its development, because we need to time all our applications around what is happening.
Excellent, Henry. I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, so first of all, we need to be alive to those climatic factors that favor the development of the disease, with cool and wet conditions being the key.
We discussed that in part one, didn't we? There's loads of stuff in that one. Go and have a look.
Yes, it was really interesting, actually, that, wasn't it? About sort of, the different sort of climatic factors across Ireland, but how, all of them are quite similar in the sense that there's, the conditions for the development of the disease, persist for quite long periods during the year. And this is actually where a resource, if we're thinking about climatic factors, where a resource such as Greencast can bring us some real value, because it factors your ongoing climatic conditions into some disease prediction models that calculate the level of risk of an outbreak developing for your location. Now, Glenn, Greencast has been around for quite some time now. Does it still have a place in our latest thinking when it comes to Microdochium patch disease control?
Yes, I certainly think so, Henry. It's a really good resource that can help us assess the situation and understand how it's developing. It's easy to find. You go into the Greencast website and take a look in Greencast tools, and it's there under historic disease information. It's quite simple. You put in your location and the period of time you want to look at, and it will give the level of risk for a number of diseases, including Microdochium patch. And that risk level is generated from local climatic data. And so what it does is it gives us a pretty good indication of what is going on in your area. Now, if someone asks me to help them out with their fungicide program, it's the first thing I look at. What I do is I go in and I use it to help build a program. I type in their address and I'll look back through the years to see when pressure traditionally started over different years. It's a really useful tool to highlight the periods when the temperatures are conducive to getting that pressure. And we looked at some of those pressures through Ireland in the last episode. And you can see even in a small area like that, there is a wide range of temperature differences going on there. But where the Greencast tool doesn't help is understanding your site conditions and your management factors. So they would need to be factored into your own thinking to get a more realistic view. If you'd thrown a load of top dressing out and you just applied that, then you should certainly be factoring up the level of risk a couple of notches. If you are on POA dominant swords, you should be factoring that notch up again, rather than a fescue dominant sward where you might want to factor it down a little bit. So Greencast is great, Henry, but it's not a replacement for on-site monitoring. That would be essential to build a much more complete picture.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Careful monitoring and I suppose feedback from all the team is essential to keep a close eye on the situation. And the need for it significantly increases as the risk level goes up, as we go through the autumn. Obviously, however, we're aiming to prevent an outbreak. But we should always be on the lookout for it. So if we're thinking about identification, we should always be looking out for those first signs of discoloration, as we see in those photographs there, which can be a sign of, well, that's infection, isn't it? And also focus on those kind of indicator greens that tend to show that little bit sooner. Glenn, I know you've been looking at using incubation bags for cores removed from the greens to see if the disease developed under those kind of enclosed, accelerated conditions to help us build an even better picture on the potential for attack. Is that still on the radar for you, Glenn?
Yeah, it really is, Henry. Those fuzz bags are a brilliant tool, and they're not widely adopted by the industry, which is frustrating, as I think it could give them a real heads up about when to begin tackling this problem. It's a really simple concept. You take out a bag, you put some moisture in it, and then you pull a plug out, probably from your indicator greens where you suspect you're going to get it first. And then you put that in the bag, you zip tie the bag up so no air can get in there, and you put it in a warm position. Now, if you come back to that bag the next morning and you see disease is established overnight, then you know that disease has gone through that 7-day cycle that you were talking about earlier, Henry. If it takes 6, 7, or 8 days before you see any, then you can be confident there wasn't much about, or the conditions haven't been suitable yet, because you know damn well that they're suitable inside that bag if it's just sat in a warm environment. If it's there and it's ready, you're pretty sure it's going to kick off there. So it's a really good way to accelerate those pressures and just decide whether it's the time to go or not.
Yeah, good. Obviously, then, we don't want to be seeing any disease at all. And so we're putting our plan together, integrated turf management plan, our disease management plan, to prevent it from occurring in the first place. And to this end, we start managing those factors that we've discussed that favour the development of the disease in such a way that reduces their influence. And I suppose the biggie when it comes to Microdochium patch disease is that period of leaf wetness, isn't it? Which is a huge driver for the development of Microdochium patch disease. But we can manage that to a certain degree, can't we? Unlike those temperatures we were talking about previously.
Yeah, we do have some control over the moisture. And in Ireland, leaf wetness and leaf moisture is a particular challenge. I've already pulled out some figures for Galway, and again on leaf wetness, looking at 2020 and similar data to I showed you previously. What I've done here is I've shown how many hours of that 24-hour period on average through these months for 2020 were we above 40% moisture or leaf wetness. Now you can see there, looking at when this pressure starts, for some of you, even in July, you're up around 10 hours of leaf wetness. August, we dropped down to around 8, but that's a long time still for that leaf to be sitting wet. And we know once we start stepping into September and October, we're going to be coupling that with a large amount of optimum temperature time. And then you can see what happens once, if we've got an infection going into November and December, we're almost going to be half of the day where the leaf is sitting wet. So we've got optimum temperature throughout the whole day, and then around half of that day there's going to be enough moisture for that disease to be spreading through it, and that carries on all the way through till January. So you can really see the value looking at this leaf wetness range of getting control of that disease early, because it's going to run rife through November and December if you haven't got it under control.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, again, scary figures there, Glenn, but it just puts everything into context for us, doesn't it? I suppose the point is that we need to try and find ways of reducing this, don't we? Because it is something that we might be able to manage.
It is, and we can manage it a bit, and you've got some pretty good dew dispersant technologies in your portfolio, don't you?
Yes, we do, actually. We don't tend to deploy them in early autumn, I suppose, when active growth is still occurring, because, as they're designed to coat the leaf, they can quickly be mown off. And so their longevity is certainly limited in early autumn. But they will have their place and feature in our sort of agronomic plans November and December, certainly. But earlier on in the autumn, we will need to consider swishing, brushing, maybe turf ironing as required to remove those dews and reduce that period of leaf wetness, and create less conducive conditions for the early development of Microdochium patch disease. I should say, however, that we have seen in our trials that the ongoing use of surfactant technologies used in conjunction or in combination with each other, I should say, through the autumn period can bring some significant improvements in this area. H2 Pro Dew Smart, our dew dispersant, and H2 Pro Flow Smart, our penetrant, has been shown in trials to really help slow down the rate of development of the disease through autumn and early winter, just by helping to manage that leaf moisture a little bit better. It just shows you how important it is. The whole leaf wetness issue, I suppose, also focuses us on, not disregarding opening up those general green settings to improve light and airflow. I don't think we should underestimate the impact that a little tree management can have on the performance of the greens during the autumn and winter period. This is definitely one measure that's kind of like for kind of thinking a little bit further ahead, but we shouldn't dismiss it, certainly.
No, we certainly shouldn't. It's of high value, that one. What about nutrition, Henry? We haven't touched on that yet. What would you be recommending through the winter periods for?
Well, Glenn, yeah, plant health obviously is hugely important in terms of sort of reducing the likelihood of the development of a serious Microdochium patch disease outbreak. And in terms of nutrition, probably primarily nitrogen. We're just trying to set the right balance of not too much or not too little. Glenn, we actually encourage the development of Microdochium patch disease in our field trials by not applying any fertilizer during this time, and it always works a treat. The actual levels of nutrition that you'll need for individual courses, I suppose, will be influenced by a large number of factors, intensity of maintenance, root zone type, general environmental conditions, that kind of thing. There's lots more we could talk about, but I'd say maybe as a general rule, during, say, August, we might be looking to supply in the region of 2 to 3 kilograms of nitrogen per week, but this would move down slightly through the autumn and into winter. I don't, depending on what the conditions are, just apply what we need to, really. But the actual figures might be more or less depending on individual situations.
So the kind of idea that autumn fertilizer is bad, it's just not quite right, is it?
No, not at all, actually. I think it's like way too simplistic. It's just, look, this is the simple fact. It's just really important to maintain plant health during this time if we want to reduce the likelihood of Microdochium patch disease occurring. An important consideration, if we're talking about nutrition, at this time, through the late summer and then through the autumn and winter, would be the source of nitrogen. And generally, we would advocate possibly using slow release granular feeds, in our case containing methylinurea, because in our trials it shows that they always perform the very best. The Sierra Form GTK step, the 6027 plus trace elements, always does a great job in its own right, in the early autumn especially, and it can be applied at low rates, 20 grams per meter squared, without any speckling at all. The Green Master Pro Light Autumn MG 6511 plus 3 MGO also has a similar slow release pattern, and that would be a common recommendation through this time if phosphorus and potassium are needed to support an overseeding program, for instance. Later on into the autumn, we might consider the use of turf hardeners, containing iron, for instance, such as the Green Master Pro Light, Invigorator Plus 4014 plus 8 Fe, that we would use to sustain plant health and ultimately try and slow the disease down. one of the factors that we've got going on, and you've already mentioned it previously, Glenn, is that is hugely influential when it comes to the development of Microdochium patch is those greens renovations, which can commonly be scheduled for August and September, maybe even later. But earlier, to take advantage of those good growth levels that might help hasten recovery or encourage good germination and establishment of new seedlings. The point is, if an aggressive program is taking place and a high level of top dressing being applied, then the risk of Microdochium patch disease developing would increase, especially if those kind of environmental conditions turn cool and damp. Glenn, you were a course manager, weren't you, in the past? When did you schedule your renovations, and were you ever, bitten by Microdochium patch disease as a result of them?
Well, generally, we tried to get into August, Henry, but August isn't always a drier month as we hoped for. And, looking over at the Irish data, you can see they're even more challenged than where I was. Yeah. When we're renovating, though, I think it's really important we're aware of how much sand we're trying to get in. A lot of people try and get as much sand in as possible, and they end up working greens really hard. And on the back of that, you can often come out of that week, particularly if the weather goes backwards on you, with more fuzz than you would like. Now, if you're in a high-risk situation, I think it's worth considering putting a preventative fungicide down in advance of that renovation week, or be ready to apply one afterwards if the weather breaks, if you're in a kind of 50-50 situation, because there is a chance of kick-starting the beginning of that Microdochium process during those weeks. And we all know once it starts moving, we're in a battle with it from that point forward. And so I think the additional work when we're smothering with sand has a real impact on this disease, although I suspect the biggest challenge and something to think about is the lack of maintenance after renovation week. People do very little on greens the following week and probably let them sit dewier and wetter than we should do. And we should really try and get that dew off. But it presents some challenges because it drags up the sand and it really delays recovery. We've also got additional fertilizer going on after renovation week in order to help them recover quickly, but we need to think carefully about, so careful selection is important. And I guess that's why later in my career and my advice would be to get preventative fungicides down, which allow you to forget about that disease a little bit. They allow you to concentrate on getting the management practices in place to get the putting surfaces back quicker, which is better for business than concentrating on the management practices needed for slowing disease, which isn't necessarily the quickest way to get a putting surface back.
Yeah. Okay. So should we draw this together? So, obviously those renovations are, a massive consideration. But in terms of our sort of overall ITM strategy, we need to focus on plant health, managing leaf moisture, and using those turf hardener type technologies as our foundation for our ITM program. But we will also need to utilize fungicide technologies as well to get us through. And we'll discuss those in the next episode.
That's really interesting, that was, Henry. I'm looking forward to talking about fungicides in the next one.